In Western films, when a woman appears inside a saloon, she is almost always shown in the same way. Beautiful, well-dressed, with a confident smile on her face. She wears an eye-catching dress, feathers in her hair, perfect makeup. She moves among the men with elegance, choosing who she wants to talk to, who she wants to dance with, who she wants to climb the stairs with. She seems like a free woman in charge of herself, who is there because she wants to and who can leave whenever she wants. Hollywood turned these women into romantic figures, into characters with attitude and power, and we watched and believed. But the reality was nothing romantic, nothing glamorous, nothing pretty. The life of a prostitute in the Old West was one of the cruelest, saddest, and shortest existences one could have at that time. These women were not there by choice. They were there because they had no other option. And what they faced every day, every night, was something that no film had ever had the courage to truly show. Today we are going to tell this story, not the Hollywood version, the real version. To understand how a woman ended up working in a brothel or saloon in the Old West, you need to first understand what it meant to be a woman at that time. The options were practically non-existent. A woman could be a wife. She could be a teacher in some cities. She could work as a seamstress, washwoman, or cook. And that was it. There was nothing else. The world of work was made by men and for men. A woman alone, without a husband, without a family, without money, was in a desperate situation. And desperation pushed these women to the only place that accepted them without asking questions: the saloon, the brothel, the street. Many of these women were immigrants who had come to the West with the promise of a better life. They came from Europe, China, Mexico, everywhere. Some were brought by men who promised marriage or honest work, and then abandoned them in the middle of nowhere. Others came with families who died along the way, victims of illness, accidents, or attacks. Suddenly, they found themselves alone, in an unknown territory, without speaking the language, without knowing anyone, with nowhere to go. And when a woman in this situation arrived in a Western city, the first to appear were the saloon and brothel owners. They offered shelter, food, and protection. The price was her body, and with no alternative, she accepted. Not by choice, for survival. Others were widows. The Wild West killed men with frightening efficiency. Accidents in the mines, disease, violence all conspired to leave women alone with children to raise and no income. A penniless widow in the Old West didn't get a pension, she didn't get government help, she didn't get anything. Society simply turned its back. And these women, who were once respectable wives, found themselves forced to enter a world that would slowly destroy them. Some left their children with acquaintances or in makeshift orphanages before starting. Others took their children with them and tried to hide from them what they did to survive. Imagine the weight of carrying that. Knowing that your son is sleeping in the next room while you work in the most degrading way possible so that he has something to eat tomorrow. There were also those that were simply sold. Yes, sold. Women and girls who were bought and trafficked by exploitation networks that operated openly in the Old West. Chinese girls brought by ships in inhumane conditions and sold at auctions on the streets of San Francisco to brothel owners. Mexican girls kidnapped from their villages and taken to border cities. Young Americans deceived with promises of jobs as waitresses or dancers, only to discover the truth too late. This trafficking took place in daylight. Everyone knew. Nobody did anything. Because these women were not considered people by society at the time. They were merchandise. Once inside the brothel, life followed a routine that was more prison than work. The woman didn't own anything. He didn't control his own money. He didn't choose his clients. He didn't set the hours. Everything was decided by the brothel owner, the so-called madam, or by the saloon owner. The money customers paid almost all went to the establishment. The woman kept a minimal fraction, and even this fraction was often discounted. They charged for the room where I slept, for the food I ate, for the clothes I wore, for the soap, for the makeup, for everything. It was a purposeful debt system. The woman started in debt and was never able to pay. The more he worked, the more he owed. And while he should have, he couldn't leave. It was slavery disguised as employment. Conditions in the brothels varied, but in most cases were appalling. In the lower category brothels, which were the overwhelming majority, women worked in tiny, poorly ventilated rooms. Ed, with a bed, a basin of water, and nothing else. These rooms were called cribs and were little larger than a closet. The walls were thin, the noise was constant, privacy did not exist. The women served dozens of men a night, one after the other, without rest, without pause, without the right to refuse. If a client was violent, if he hit or hurt himself, the woman would bear it in silence. Complaining meant losing your place. And losing your place meant going out onto the street where the situation was even worse, because below the brothels there was another level, the women who worked on the street. No roof, no protection, nothing. They were in alleys, in abandoned warehouses, and precarious tents on the outskirts of cities. They would serve anyone at any price, $1, 50 cents, sometimes less. They were the most vulnerable, the most exploited, the ones who died first. Nobody looked after them. Nobody cared if they returned to their sheds alive or if they woke up dead in some alley. They were invisible. The city passed by them every day and pretended they didn't exist. Many were dependent on alcohol or opium, substances they used to cope with reality. And this dependence trapped them even more in that cycle because they needed to work to buy the drug, and they needed the drug to support the work. A vicious circle that only ended in one way, in death. And death came early for these women. The life expectancy of a prostitute in the Old West was alarmingly low. Diseases were the main cause. Syphilis, gonorrhea, and other venereal diseases spread unchecked. There was no protection, there was no effective treatment, there was no prevention. Syphilis, in particular, was devastating. It started with small wounds that seemed harmless, then it progressed to skin rashes, body aches, fever, and in the final phase, it attacked the brain. The woman began to lose her reason, to have hallucinations, to no longer recognize the people around her. She died slowly, in agony, often abandoned by everyone. No one wanted to take care of a sick woman who could no longer work. She simply ceased to exist to the world before she even truly died. Tuberculosis was another silent killer. In the poorly ventilated rooms of brothels, the disease spread easily. The woman began to cough, lose weight, and become weaker every day. And I kept working because I had no choice. I worked until my body couldn't take it anymore, until I fell, until I couldn't get up. And when that happened, it was replaced. Another woman occupied the room, the bed, her place, and life in the brothel continued as if nothing had happened. Violence was constant and came from all sides. From the customers, who were often drunk, aggressive men who treated these women like disposable objects. Beatings were routine, burns, cuts, broken bones. Some women carried scars all over their bodies, marks from nights they preferred to forget but never could, and there was no one to turn to. The police did not protect prostitutes. The law did not recognize violence against them as a crime. If a woman turned up dead in an alley or a brothel room, investigation was minimal or non-existent. She was just one more, another nameless body that the city buried without ceremony and forgot to the next day. The violence also came from the brothel owners themselves. Many controlled women through fear. They beat them when they disobeyed, locked them when they tried to escape, threatened to kill them if they spoke to anyone outside. Some had henchmen who watched the women day and night, ensuring they did not escape and continued working. It was a system of absolute control, where women had no voice, no will, no identity. It was a body that generated profit. When it stopped generating, it was discarded. Alcohol and opium were the only refuges these women had. And many brothel owners encouraged addiction because a dependent woman was a controllable woman. They provided drink and drugs for free or at low prices, knowing that addiction created an invisible chain stronger than any padlock. The woman drank to forget, smoked opium to not feel, and little by little she began to lose herself within herself. The body continued to function, but the person inside was slowly disappearing. Many reached a point where they no longer remembered who they were before entering that life. The past became a distant fog, and the future simply did not exist. And when the body couldn't take it anymore, when illness, violence, and addiction took the final toll, what happened? Nothing. Nobody cried. No one was sorry. The body was taken to the city cemetery and buried in a grave without a name, without a tombstone, without any mark that said that there lay a human being who had a life, who had dreams, who had a name. Old West cemeteries are full of these anonymous graves. Rows of unmarked mounds of earth, where lie women that history has completely forgotten. Women that no one visited, that no one remembered, that simply disappeared from the world as if they had never existed. Some had children who never knew where their mother was buried. Others had families in the East or Europe who spent the rest of their lives waiting for a letter that never arrived, expecting a daughter who never returned, without knowing that she was there, under a meter of dry earth with nothing to identify her. This is perhaps the cruelest part of this whole story. It's not just the life they led. It's complete erasure after they die, as if the suffering wasn't enough. Even their memories were stolen. There were exceptions, of course. Some women managed to rise within this system. The madams, the brothel owners, were women who had started out as prostitutes and, through intelligence, luck, or sheer determination, had managed to accumulate enough money to open their own establishments. Some became powerful figures in their cities, with political and financial influence that rivaled that of the richest men. But these were the rare, very rare exception. For every madam who achieved a better life, there were hundreds of women who died anonymous, sick, and forgotten in a brothel room. There were also those who tried to leave. They gathered what little they could hide and fled in the middle of the night, trying to start over in another city, with another name, with another story. Some could. They got married, opened small businesses, built a new life, but the past was a shadow that followed them. In a time without the internet, without digital records, escape was easier than it would be today, but the fear never went away. The fear of being recognized, of being exposed, of losing everything I had built because of who I had been before. Many lived the rest of their lives carrying this secret without telling anyone, neither their husbands nor their children. They died with this story stored inside them, and the truth went to the grave with them. There are historians who discovered decades later that respectable women from certain communities had a past in the brothels of the West. They discovered it through documents, old records, photos that survived time, and in each case the reaction was the same: surprise, as if it were impossible for that woman, that grandmother, that church founder, to have ever been what she was, but it had been. And the fact that he managed to leave that life and build another was in itself an act of courage that few men in the Old West ever needed to have. One thing that needs to be said is that Old West society was deeply hypocritical towards these women. The same men who frequented the brothels at night were those who condemned the prostitutes during the day. The same cities that profited from the taxes levied on brothels were the ones that prohibited these women from walking down certain streets, from going to certain stores, from participating in any social activity. They were tolerated while they were useful and despised all the time. They generated wealth for the cities, entertainment for men, and received nothing in return other than disease, violence, and contempt. It was a system built to use them and discard them, and it worked perfectly. The churches preached against them. Respectable wives did not look in their direction. Children were taught to cross the street when one of them approached. But the brothel remained open. The saloon continued to operate. The men kept coming in, and the women continued inside, doing what society demanded of them and at the same time punished them for doing. It was a cruel contradiction that defined the Wild West as much as duels and gold rushes. But this contradiction, the films never showed. The next time you watch a Western and see that beautiful woman walking down the saloon stairs with a smile on her face, remember everything you just heard. Remember that behind that movie smile there was a reality made of pain, illness, violence, and loneliness. Remember, those women didn't choose that life. They were pushed into it by a world that gave them no alternative. And remember, most of them don't even have a name on a tombstone. They were erased from history as if they had never existed. But they existed. Each of them existed. And the story that no one tells is the one that most deserved to be heard. And now I ask you, why do you think Hollywood never really showed this reality? Leave your opinion in the comments.